Every case leaves a trace, a name, a date, a question that was never answered. This is Silent Shadows. On the evening of July 5th, 1919, a farmer was traveling along a lonely road near Little Stretton in Leicestershire when he noticed a bicycle lying near the verge. Beside it was a young woman. At first, in the fading light, it looked as though she had fallen. But the woman was not moving, and the stillness of the road made the scene feel immediately wrong. Her name was Bella Wright, and she was just 21 years old. Bella, as she was known, lived in the village of Stoughton with her family. She worked at a factory and regularly traveled by bicycle, as many working people did in rural England at the time. A bicycle meant independence. It made jobs, family visits, and nearby villages accessible without waiting for train or relying on someone else. On that Saturday, Bella had set out on what should have been an ordinary summer journey. Britain was only months removed from the First World War. Soldiers had returned home, factories were adjusting to peacetime, and communities were trying to settle into familiar routines. But the war had left behind weapons, ammunition, and men carrying experiences that were not easily put away. None of that seemed connected to Bella when she began her ride. By the end of the evening, though, investigators would be looking for an armed stranger. Bella had been visiting relatives in the countryside east of Leicester. Witnesses later helped reconstruct parts of her route, though not every movement could be established with certainty. What mattered most was that she had not been alone throughout the evening. At several points, people saw her riding with a man. He was older than Bella, neatly dressed, and riding a bicycle painted a distinctive shade of green. That detail would become central to the entire case. Not just a bicycle, but a green bicycle. Unusual enough to stay in witnesses' memories, Bella and the man were seen together near local cottages and roads. At one point, they stopped to ask for directions. Their manner did not appear openly hostile. There was no obvious argument, no call for help, and nothing that made the witnesses believe Bella was in immediate danger. Now here's where the quiet normality of the evening becomes unsettling. Bella seems to have met the man by chance. According to the account later associated with him, they had spoken after she asked about the road, and he then rode with her for part of the journey. If that was true, this was not necessarily a planned meeting. It was a brief encounter between two cyclists that somehow ended with Bella dead on an isolated lane. The man later identified as her companion was Leight. He was a former army officer and had also worked as a school teacher. Like many men of his generation, his adult life had been shaped by wartime service. Witnesses did not know his name when they saw him with Bella. They remembered his appearance, his clothing, and above all the bicycle. At that stage, however, those memories were only fragments without a suspect attached to them. Bella's body was discovered on a road close to Little Stretton. Her bicycle was nearby, and there was no clear sign that robbery had been the motive. The first impression was confusing. A cyclist on an uneven country road could fall, strike her head, and die. In poor light, an injury to the face might resemble damage caused by an accident, but closer examination revealed something far more serious. Bella had suffered a gunshot wound to the face. A bullet was recovered, transforming what might initially have looked like a fatal cycling accident into a murder investigation. Yet even that discovery did not explain exactly what had happened. No one had reported seeing the shooting. No murder weapon was lying beside her, and the road itself offered few reliable clues about whether Bella had stopped voluntarily or had been forced to stop. So let's back up a second. Investigators had a young woman, a bullet, a bicycle, and witnesses who had seen her with an unknown man shortly before her death. They also had the unusual color of that man's bicycle. In an era before widespread forensic databases, surveillance cameras, or rapid national communication, witness descriptions mattered enormously. Police circulated information and began trying to identify the rider of the green machine. The search was difficult because memory is never a perfect recording. Witnesses had seen the pair only briefly, without knowing that every detail might later matter in a murder trial. Lighting, distance, and the passage of time could all affect identification. Still, the accounts were consistent enough to create a picture. Bella had spent part of her final journey in the company of a man whose bicycle stood out from the ordinary black machines commonly seen on the roads. Leight did not immediately come forward to say that he had ridden with her. That omission later became deeply suspicious to prosecutors. If the encounter had been innocent, why remain silent while police searched for the green bicycle rider? But silence alone is not proof of murder. A person might fear suspicion, scandal, or exposure for reasons unrelated to the killing. That tension would eventually sit at the heart of Light's defense. Months passed, and the investigation appeared to be losing momentum. Then the green bicycle re-entered the story in the most dramatic possible way. Parts of a bicycle were recovered from a canal in Leicester. The machine had been dismantled before disposal, and identifying numbers had been removed. The water also yielded items connected with a firearm, including ammunition and a revolver holster. Suddenly, the witness descriptions no longer seemed like a dead end. A bicycle does not dismantle itself. scrape away its own identifying marks, and sink into a canal. Someone had gone to considerable trouble to prevent the machine from being recognized. Investigators traced the recovered parts to Ronald Leight. The bicycle matched the distinctive green machine described by witnesses. Leight eventually acknowledged that it had been his and that he had disposed of it. What he denied firmly was killing Bella Wright. Light's disposal of the bicycle looked devastating. The prosecution could argue that he had hidden the most visible object linking him to Bella's last known movements. The removed identification numbers suggested deliberate concealment rather than casual abandonment, and the presence of ammunition and a holster in the canal appeared to bring the bicycle evidence dangerously close to the gunshot that killed her. But appearance and legal proof are not the same thing. The actual firearm used to kill Bella was never conclusively placed in Light's hand. Investigators had the bullet recovered from her body and ammunition associated with the canal evidence, but firearms examination was still developing. Experts could compare caliber markings and physical characteristics, yet they could not offer the kind of microscopic certainty a modern jury might expect. Even today, forensic conclusions are debated. In 1920, the limitations were greater. There was another problem. The route from suspicious conduct to murder required several separate inferences. First, the jury had to accept that Light was the man seen with Bella. Then it had to conclude that he remained with her until the place where she died. Finally, it had to believe that he fired the fatal shot. The hidden bicycle might support suspicion at every stage, but it did not independently prove the final act. Light reportedly gave shifting or incomplete explanations about his movements and the disposal of his property. For investigators, those inconsistencies strengthened the case. An innocent man, they believed, would have no reason to hide a bicycle, remove its numbers, or discard related items in deep water. But the defense had an answer. Light had panicked because he realized that the bicycle would make him the obvious suspect, not because he was guilty. It's an uncomfortable argument because destroying evidence can feel like an admission, yet fear can produce irrational behavior. Someone who knows he was the last publicly observed companion of a murder victim may believe that the truth will not protect him. The jury therefore had to decide what Light's concealment really meant. Was it consciousness of guilt or consciousness of danger? The physical act was clear. The motive behind it was not. By June of 1920, nearly a year after Bella's death, Ronald Leight was brought to trial. The proceedings attracted intense public interest. The story contained all the elements that newspapers of the period seized upon: a murdered young woman, a mysterious stranger, a country lane, wartime ammunition, and a green bicycle raised from a canal. But inside the courtroom, drama had to be converted into admissible evidence. The prosecution presented the witness identifications and traced Bella's final known journey. It emphasized that Light had been riding with her, that he possessed the distinctive bicycle, and that he later attempted to make that bicycle disappear. The ammunition and holster recovered from the canal added another layer. Taken together, prosecutors argued these were not random coincidences. They formed a chain pointing toward Light as Bella's killer. The defense attacked that chain link by link. Witnesses had seen the cyclist only briefly. No one saw Light shoot Bella. No one could establish with certainty what occurred on the road after the pair passed from view. The fatal weapon had not been recovered and conclusively matched to him. Even the bullet evidence could not answer the most important question: who had actually pulled the trigger? Suspicion, the defense insisted, was not enough. Light admitted meeting Bella and riding with her for part of the way, but maintained that they separated before she reached the place where she was killed. That admission mattered. He was no longer denying the encounter that witnesses described. Instead, the dispute became one of timing and distance. If he left Bella alive, then another person could have met her later. If he stayed with her, the case against him became much stronger. But there was no reliable witness who could account for every minute between Bella's last sighting and the discovery of her body. Country roads could be empty for long stretches, then suddenly carry a farm worker, a cyclist, or a motor vehicle. The landscape created privacy for whoever fired the shot, but it also created uncertainty for the investigation. There was no complete timeline, only a narrowing window filled with assumptions. The medical and ballistic evidence also left room for argument about the circumstances of the shooting. The position of the wound could indicate where the gun had been in relation to Bella, but it could not reconstruct every movement immediately beforehand. Was she standing beside her bicycle? Had she dismounted to speak? Was the shot intentional, or did a weapon discharge during some confrontation? The evidence established homicide, but not a full sequence. Bella herself was in danger of becoming secondary to the spectacle surrounding the accused and his bicycle. She was a young working woman making a familiar journey through villages she knew. Nothing in the surviving account suggests that she expected violence that evening. Her final hours were reconstructed through other people's glimpses, while her own experience remained inaccessible. That absence is one of the most haunting features of the case. The jury ultimately found Ronald Leight not guilty. The available circumstantial and forensic evidence had not persuaded its members beyond reasonable doubt. An acquittal did not declare that every part of Light's story was true. It meant the prosecution had failed to meet the required legal standard. He left the court cleared of the charge, and under the law he could not be treated as Bella Wright's convicted killer. For Bella's family, that verdict offered no alternative explanation. If Light had not killed her, then who had? Had another traveler appeared after the two cyclists separated? Had someone been waiting on the road? Was the shooting connected to an encounter that left no surviving witness? Or had the jury simply refused to cross the gap between powerful suspicion and proof? None of those questions received a definitive answer. And then there is the Canal evidence. Light's decision to dispose of the green bicycle remains almost impossible to separate from the murder, even if it could not legally establish guilt. The removed numbers show an effort to frustrate identification. The ammunition and holster deepen the suspicion. Still, without the murder weapon or a conclusive ballistic link, the Canal held evidence of concealment, not a complete solution to Bella's death. Over the years, the case has often been discussed as though the bicycle itself solved the mystery. It did identify the man seen with Bella, and it exposed conduct that demanded explanation. But evidence can be incriminating without being decisive. The green bicycle told investigators that Ronald Light had hidden his connection to the evening. It could not tell them exactly when he left Bella, what happened on the lane, or who fired the shot. The historical setting matters here. Modern investigators might seek biological traces, recover location data, examine camera footage, or search electronic communications. None of those options existed. Even the scene itself may not have been preserved according to present-day standards because the nature of Bella's injury was not immediately obvious. Once time and weather affected a rural road, small traces could vanish, leaving testimony and physical objects to carry the case. Memory also hardened as the case became famous. A witness who originally recalled a general impression might later encounter photographs, newspaper descriptions, or public discussion. That does not mean the witness was dishonest. It means identification evidence has natural limits, especially when attention was not focused on the stranger during the original sighting. The jury had to weigh sincere recollection against the possibility of ordinary human error. Ronald Light's background generated its own interpretations. His military experience meant that knowledge of firearms would not have been remarkable, and possession of ammunition in the years after the war was not unimaginable. But neither fact proved that he carried a weapon while riding with Bella. The prosecution could build context around him. The defense could show that the same context applied to many former servicemen. Again, certainty remained just out of reach. What seems beyond dispute is the central sequence. Bella Wright was seen riding with a man on a green bicycle. Later that evening, she was found fatally shot beside her own bicycle. Ronald Light was identified as the man, and he admitted disposing of his green bicycle after dismantling it and removing identifying marks. Related firearm items were recovered from the Canal. He was tried, defended himself against the accusation, and was acquitted. Everything beyond that sequence becomes an argument about meaning. Perhaps Light concealed the bicycle because it connected him to a murder he had committed. Perhaps he concealed it because it connected him to a victim he had innocently accompanied. The first explanation feels more direct. The second was sufficiently possible to create reasonable doubt. A criminal trial cannot choose the most unsettling explanation simply because it makes the pieces fit neatly. More than a century later, Bella's murder remains unresolved. No one else was convicted, and no later discovery produced a definitive account of her final moments. The green bicycle survives in the story as both breakthrough and dead end, the object that led police to their suspect but could not carry the case across the threshold required for conviction. It answered the question of who rode with Bella while leaving the larger question untouched. So when you picture this case, try not to begin with the courtroom or the Canal. Begin with Bella on her bicycle, moving along a Leicestershire road on a summer evening. She was 21, returning through a landscape that should have been familiar and safe. Somewhere along that route, an ordinary encounter became fatal. The man on the green bicycle lived under suspicion but was acquitted. Bella received neither a proven explanation nor justice. If this case stayed with you, there are others waiting. Subscribe to Silent Shadows and walk with us into the next one.